Back to the channel. My name is Lisa Elvin Stoltari, and I am a genealogist and a passionate traveler. Over the last year or so, I've been featuring each Fade Roi or King's daughter and getting to know their stories a little bit better. There are over 700 of them, so we've got a long way to go. Today's is episode 136 and features Claude Demising. But before we begin, I want to show you how you can support the channel. The first three keep you in the know. Subscribe, like, and notify. The next three are ways to help the channel grow. Ko-fi, Etsy, and Patreon. All are ways of showing your support. Let's get started, shall we? And now we look into episode 136, Claude Demising. This was originally a viewer request. And when I looked in my files, my best friend's daughter has Claude as a great-grandmother, and one of my work colleagues also has this as a great-grandmother. So with that being said, let's get to know Claude a little bit better. So Claude was born in 1643 in Paris, and her parish was Saint-Nicolas du Chardonnay. And there is a picture on the bottom there that actually with the circle, that is where exactly Saint-Nicolas du Chardonnay was found. It is found in the 5th arrondissement of Paris. And I just want to draw your attention to the map on the upper top of the screen. I've circled Île-de-France because that is the region of France where Paris is found. So that is, remember that France is divided into 18 or 20 regions, and inside of those regions are the different departments or counties, if you want to call it that, and inside that are the cities. The chapel that she would have been baptized in, it was first built in 1230 in a field planted with, in French, it's called chardons, which are thistles, and that is why it's called Saint Nicolas du Chardonnay. And so you can see how historic this particular church is. It kept growing and growing over time. The 5th arrondissement of Paris is also known as the Panthéon, and it's situated on the rive gauche, the left bank of the River Seine. It is one of the capital's central arrondissements, and it's notable for being the location of the Quartier Latin, which has nothing to do with Latin language. It has to do with, it kind of does, because it is the home base of the Sorbonne, in which Latin was taught. So it's very focused on education, very prestigious. Remember that Sorbonne has been there since the 12th century. We also have the National Museum and the Jardin des Plantes, and it's one of the oldest districts, and it really dates back to the ancient times. And there are certain parts of that 5th arrondissement where you can actually see like a Roman amphitheater and Roman baths. So it really is one of those places where you go to France and you really you're captivated into that part of history. And then, of course, that picture that I have on the right part of your screen is just a very common and classic picture of what the 5th arrondissement looks like. Parts of it look like today. Now, when and how did she get to New France? So after her father's death, she sailed on La Nouvelle France ship and arrived in New France on July 3rd, 1668. She continued on to Montreal, where she stayed at the famous Maison Saint-Gabriel. Let's have a look at that. So this is the actual, on the left part of your screen, or the right, I'm sorry, right part of your screen is the actual place where the ladies were housed. There was about 30 or 40 of them that were housed, and Claude was one of them. And it still exists today and is a museum. Let's talk a little bit about the foundations of this place. Marguerite Bourgeois, who is the founder of the Congrégation de Notre-Dame de Montreal, she was by far the most influential woman in Quebec, and certainly Montreal's history. Born in France in 1620, and she was invited in 1653 at the age of 33. She was invited to come to New France and establish a religious congregation and school by Paul de Chomedy, Sœur de Maisonneuve. the governor of the French settlement of Montreal at the time. She established the Notre Dame congregation and helped organize its congregation and its church. The governor allowed her to use a stable as the first school house, and this in turn became the first public school in Montreal. By 1663, she continued her work with the Filles du Roi by using the farm she purchased at Pointe Saint-Charles to feed the poor and create a source of revenue for the church. The Filles du Roi would come here and receive instruction on their new lives, including cooking and sewing, and their sisters would oversee the selection of the husbands. Marguerite would continue until her death, creating educational and religious institutions that would help the struggling town of Ville-Marie, which it was known as, become one day the mighty Montreal. We have much to thank her for. Marguerite Bourgeois was made a saint in 1982, and she was the first Canadian woman to be canonized. The groom that she selected and who selected her, his name was Pierre Pertius, and he was born in 1643 in a town called Amboise, or commune, as we know they're called. And this was in the region of France known as Centre-Val de Loire. You can see on the map on your left how much it is in the middle of France. And his particular region, or departement, is Indre-et-Loire. So it's on the, I would guess, the left hand, and that would be the east or west part of that particular town or that particular region. The church that he would have been baptized in it's called Saint Denis, and it was started about 11th century by Hugues, the first lord of Amboise. It was built on the site of an ancient Gallo-Roman monument, and it was remodeled in the 16th century. And Amboise itself, as a city or a commune, dates from the 5th century. So there are no words to say how much this place has seen. Chateau Clos was built by Hugues d'Amboise in 1471. The palace has known several famous owners, such as the French king, Charles VIII. So that's the picture on the right of your screen. And the chateau at l'Amboise was home to Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, for much of her early life. And Leonardo da Vinci, I almost said Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo da Vinci would live here and die here. This is there's a museum dedicated to him nearby. And in the picture on the left is just what Amboise looks like today. So how did Pierre come to New France? So he came, as so many did before, he came with the Salière Company, with the Gagne Regiment on August 17, 1665. So Pierre and Claude were married in December 10, 1668 in Montreal, and he was here for about 3 years, so he had the opportunity to, begin a life, if you will, and she had arrived, that summer. So I think that was pretty fast for her to make that commitment to him. So let's see how they build their lives. So let's get to talking a little bit about Montreal and Ville-Marie, this wonderful city that would be the place where Claude and Pierre would form their lives and their families. It started out, in 1642 with, Paul de Chaumedy, Sœur de Maisonneuve. It was essentially a missionary center, but it did not thrive very well. And so finally, in 1653, he decided he was going to go back to France and say, you know what, you got to help me out here, guys. So he recruited 100 colonists, including Marguerite Bourgeois that we talked about, and these became known as La Grande Recrue. So not only Marguerite, but those 100 people became the founders of Montreal. And as we go through much of the history of Les Filles du Roi in Montreal, and also when we explore Les Filles à Marnier later on this year or into next year, we're going to see more and more of those founders. And so I just wanted to also mention that Montreal as a city, it had a hard time because there was no, militia, there was nothing. So finally, Maisonneuve in 1663 decided to form a local militia because there was no carignan Salière soldiers to, protect them or anything like that. And the Iroquois were really, really attacking. And so they would form their own militia, and each person had a squad, and they were truly, it kind of is, having been not raised in Montreal, but knowing Montreal as I do, I can see where that fierceness and loyalty to Montreal comes from, to defend it at all costs. And so the pictures that I've chosen are really representations of Montreal and what it looked like. Also, this recent one on the right is really just kind of a picture-perfect picture of one of the old Montreal and what it looks like. And then we have the census from 1681 when we have Pierre, who's 37, Claude Damise, his wife is listed as a year older than him. We have Catherine, we have Jeanne at 10, we have Elizabeth and Geneviève. We have 3 guns and 8 goats, and we have 5 avalars, so that's about 2 to 3 acres of land. Let's see the family that they created. They would end up having, Pierre and Claude, 12 children together. Catherine would marry Pierre Maguet and have 7 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. Then we have Jean, who died at 8 years of age. We have Jeanne, who married Nicolas Desroches and had 8 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. We have Elizabeth, who married Claude Caron and had 5 children, 2 of whom made it. Marie married his brother, Vital Caron, and had 8 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. We have Geneviève, who married Albin Gervais and had 1 child who made it to adulthood. She then married Louis Renaud and had 1 child who did not make it to adulthood. We have Marguerite Françoise, who did not marry. We have Angélique, who married Louis Lefebvre and had 8 children, 6 of whom made it. Anne-Françoise would die in infancy. Pierre actually did not marry, but did father 1 child with a lady named Angélique Boutelier, but he would pass away at the tragic age of 21 in Deerfield, Massachusetts, which I believe was an Indian attack. I'm fairly confident of that. More research. François would pass away in infancy, and the second Pierre would marry Marie-Catherine Mallet and have 3 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. Claude would have a relationship with a man named Jean Paradis while she's married, and she would give birth to André, who would go on to marry Marguerite Ménard and would have 5 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. So André Paradis links back up. This is a line that is very interesting. You know what? She was a woman ahead of her time. She, obviously she had this happen, and I don't know if it was willing or not or anything like that. All I know is the child survives, and his mother is definitely Claude. So that's an interesting tidbit of history, and how they resolved this, I don't know. But, it's amazing, actually. So in early 1682, Pierre and Claude rented out a room to a woman named Anne Lemarque dit Folleville, who owned a cabaret and was married to a gentleman named Claude Tessard de Folleville. Anne was known to be a woman who was a free spirit, shall we say, and also believed to have had several scandalous relationships. So she was kind of on the outs with her husband. It was said that she engaged in prostitution and had several children whose father was not her husband. This would be an interesting DNA study, to be sure. As a matter of fact, in my next series, The Marriageable Girls, in which Anne Lemarque was a member, we will be exploring her life in greater detail. As for Pierre and Claude, they were called to testify as they were a witness to some of Anne's activities as she had been residing at their home. Interesting. So Claude would pass away on October 6, 1705. She was 62 years old, a fairly young, age even in those times. She and Pierre would have been married an astonishing 35 years and would have an even more incredible 158 descendants by 1729. Pierre would marry another fille du roi, Françoise Moisin, within the year, but he too would pass away a year later on the 16th of April, 1708. These are their two death records, and they are both buried at Notre Dame in Montreal. Are six of my best resources: La Société des Filles du Roi, the Quebec Genealogical E-Society, Nos Origines, Généalogie Québec, Migration, and Facebook, Filles du Roi Descendants. I have listed the links to these. These are fabulous sites and will really truly help you pursue your own research. So ends episode 136, Claude Demising. She was a remarkable woman in many ways, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to get to know her. She was truly one of those founding mothers, not only of Quebec, but really Montreal, because she really, not only did she, inhabit the Maison Gabrielle and have that link to Montreal's great history, but she also produced so many descendants, 158. That's just phenomenal. She did have a lot of children, but she also was a woman ahead of her time, I think. And for her bravery and her dedication, we thank her, we bless her memory, and we're glad she came to our shores. Until I see you on episode 137, au revoir.